Well, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into what a lot of analysts are now calling the silent war.
Hmm.
And this really builds directly on the foundation we've talked about before. The complex history, the geopolitics between Iran, Israel, and of course the United States.
Yeah.
If you sort of picture all that friction as this massive underlying structure of a modern conflict, what we're really focusing on today are the hidden systems, the nerves, the muscles, the things that make that structure actually fight.
That's a perfect metaphor, actually, because
Yeah.
when people hear the word war, the mind, it still conjures up these, 20th century images.
Soldiers, yeah.
Tanks. Exactly. Large-scale troop movements, missiles flying across borders. But the reality of how modern conflict works it's fundamentally shifted. The vast majority of the pressure, the damage, and the strategic gains in this whole engagement, they happen quietly.
Out of sight.
Completely. It's fought not in trenches, but across these huge digital networks through these incredibly specialized secret operations, and maybe most powerfully, through the ruthless application of global financial pressure.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to go beyond that traditional kinetic battlefield, the bombs and the bullets, to really analyze the three main non-kinetic battlegrounds of this silent conflict. We'll look at cyber warfare fighting with computer code, then espionage,
Which is that classic brutal game of spies and secrets. And finally, economic sanctions, the massive crippling financial squeeze.
And understanding these methods is it's essential to being well-informed.
About how global power struggles actually function in the 21st century. It's not just academic.
Right.
These battles, they impact everything from, international oil prices and supply chain stability, all the way down to the very security of the core infrastructure you rely on every single day. They're subtle, they're persistent, and they're often far more damaging in the long run than one single, high-profile physical attack. So we're really pulling back the curtain on this hidden, ongoing conflict.
Let's go with pillar one then. This is maybe the one that's evolving the fastest, and it's this constant source of friction. Cyber warfare.
It sounds a bit abstract, a bunch of data flying around, but it really does operate as a digital weapon. So when we're talking about Iran and Israel, what does this internet-based code-to-code
Conflict actually, look like on the ground.
Well, cyber warfare is really the purest definition of a non-kinetic conflict that is looking for genuinely physical results. It's when one country intentionally attacks another's computer networks, and the purpose is explicit. It's either to steal critically sensitive information, that's data exfiltration, or the much more aggressive approach to cause physical damage or, systemic disruption.
Sabotage.
It's digital sabotage. And for Iran and Israel, this has just evolved into this ongoing, daily digital fight. It has escalated so rapidly over the last decade from just, simple information gathering to outright sabotage.
And this is where the story of this silent war really starts to take shape. You simply cannot discuss the cyber conflict in this region without talking about the one event that just fundamentally changed how the entire world saw digital weapons.
Yeah.
And that's the Stuxnet attack back in 2010.
Right.
This was the moment the world woke up and realized a line of code could actually physically destroy a machine.
Stuxnet was a complete revelation. This wasn't your
Standard malware designed to, crash a server or steal some credit card numbers.
No.
This was an immensely sophisticated piece of military-grade digital engineering. It was custom-built to target one very specific type of industrial equipment inside one very specific place.
Iran's nuclear facilities.
Exactly. The centrifuges at the Natanz enrichment plant, the very machines they use for enriching uranium.
And what's so crucial to grasp here is the attribution and the collaboration. This wasn't the work of some independent hacking group in a basement.
Oh, not at all, no. The expert consensus, and this is supported by years of really detailed analysis and some pretty significant leaks, it points squarely to a joint clandestine effort.
State-sponsored?
Absolutely. The widely reported belief is that the United States and Israel worked together on this. They pooled these vast intelligence and engineering resources to conceive, develop, and then, deploy this incredibly complex virus.
So how did they even get it in there? I thought places like that were supposed to be totally disconnected from the internet.
They are, and that was the genius of Stuxnet. It was built to overcome the biggest security hurdle in these industrial environments, the air gap.
The air gap, explain that.
So most critical infrastructure networks, power plants, water treatment facilities, nuclear sites, they are intentionally disconnected from the public internet. They're air gapped precisely to prevent these kinds of remote cyber attacks.
So you can't just hack in from the outside.
You can't. So Stuxnet was designed to be introduced through portable media, most likely an infected USB drive carried in either by an unsuspecting engineer or a compromised insider. It had to physically cross the gap.
So once it made that jump, once it was inside that isolated network, how did it actually go from being a computer program to, physical destruction?
It was incredibly targeted. It zeroed in on the most vulnerable part of the whole system, the industrial control software.
It's known as SCADA, that's Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Systems.
Okay.
Specifically, it was looking for systems made by the company Siemens. Now, these SCADA systems, you can think of them
As the electronic brains that regulate a factory floor. They govern pressure, temperature, and in this case, the rotational speed of those centrifuges.
And Stuxnet carried what, a kind of weapon inside it?
It carried two incredibly destructive payload mechanisms.
Yeah.
And the genius of it and the terror of it really was its subtlety.
So it wasn't a big, loud, obvious attack.
Not at all. The virus would first hijack that SCADA system. But then, and this is the crucial part, it would record the normal operational data. The usual speed, the normal vibration levels, and it would play that normal, non-threatening data back to the operator's control screens.
Oh, wow. So the engineers in the control room are looking at their monitors.
And everything looked perfect. The screens were showing that all systems are green, everything is operating normally. But behind the scenes, the virus was secretly issuing these chaotic, destructive commands
directly to the physical machinery.
So you've got an engineer looking at a green light while the actual hardware is being pushed to its breaking point.
Precisely. One of the payloads would command the centrifuges
to spin wildly out of control, accelerating them well beyond their safe structural limits. The sheer kinetic force would, degrade them or even shatter them immediately.
And the other payload?
After a short period of that high-speed chaos, it would command them to decelerate, almost to a halt. Then it would accelerate them again, this constant, uncontrolled cycling. It inflicted deep structural fatigue on these very delicate, high-speed rotors.
It sounds like you're describing a kind of digital torture for the hardware. A slow, deliberate physical destruction hidden inside the machines. And the operator has no idea until the whole thing just fails.
And the results were tangible, they were real. Stuxnet reportedly
disabled nearly 1,000 centrifuges at that Natanz facility.
1,000.
1,000. And analysts estimated that this single action set Iran's nuclear program back by about 18 months
to 2 full years. This wasn't just data loss. It was a quantifiable physical setback achieved entirely without deploying a single soldier or a single bomb.
And it changed the world. It permanently established that the cyber conflict was now a high-stakes strategic domain of modern warfare.
It absolutely did. A line of code could now do the work of an airstrike.
But there has to be a downside to using a weapon like that. A weapon that so fundamentally changes the rules of the game. It must open the door to immediate retaliation. I mean, Iran wasn't just going to absorb that kind of strategic hit and do nothing. You mentioned this opened a door for attacks against infrastructure everywhere. Was that short-term delay really worth the long-term risk of this kind of weapon proliferating?
And that is the absolute core of the strategic debate that still surrounds Stuxnet today. On one hand, yes, it proved the concept. It achieved a major military goal non-kinetically. But on the other hand, it also proved that industrial infrastructure, which was previously thought to be pretty safe behind that air gap, was now inherently vulnerable.
It showed everyone how to do it.
It gave them the blueprint. The source code and the techniques used in Stuxnet, they inevitably leaked out. They were studied, reverse engineered by Iranian engineers and, other hostile state actors around the world. It allowed them to rapidly refine their own offensive cyber capabilities.
So it raised the global risk level for everyone.
It absolutely did. The genie was out of the bottle.
So what did that retaliation look like? What kind of specific targets did Iran prioritize once they had these newly enhanced capabilities?
Their response really focused on strategic disruption, but also on causing public panic. So they targeted critical infrastructure in both Israel and in the United States. In Israel, I think the most alarming attempt, the one that's cited in a lot of intelligence reports, involved targeting water systems.
The water supply.
Yes. And the goal was
highly specific and potentially lethal. They were attempting to change the chemical levels in the water, specifically, trying to fluctuate the chlorine or fluoride levels.
Attacking a nation's water supply, that's a massive escalation. That suggests an intent to cause, widespread public illness, paralyzing fear.
It absolutely crosses a critical line. Now, the attack was reportedly detected and neutralized before it caused any significant harm, but the intent was crystal clear: to leverage digital access to create real-world kinetic terror and instability for the civilian population.
And what about the U.S.? We were part of Stuxnet. Presumably we were a target too.
A huge target. Iranian groups launched significant attacks against U.S. financial stability.
I do remember hearing reports about massive attacks on American banks around that time. What was the mechanism they were using?
They conducted these coordinated waves of what are called distributed denial of service attacks, or DDoS attacks. The campaign was often known collectively as Operation Ababil.
A DDoS attack? That's not about stealing data, is it?
No, it's about disruption. It's like creating a massive digital traffic jam. The attack overwhelms a network with so much junk traffic that legitimate customers trying to log into their bank accounts, they simply can't get through.
So it just shuts everything down.
Exactly. They effectively targeted major U.S. banks like Bank of America, JPMorgan Chase, and they shut down online services and customer access for days at a time. It created massive disruption, it tarnished consumer trust, and it imposed really high costs on the banks to mitigate the attacks.
Let's just pause and solidify some key terms here for you. We've talked about the people doing this work and the things they're attacking. So a hacker in this context, what are we really talking about?
Yeah, that's a good distinction. In state-sponsored conflict, a hacker isn't some kid in a hoodie. It's a highly skilled technical operative, or more often, a whole team of them, working under the command of a state intelligence or the military. They use this deep computer knowledge to gain unauthorized access to secure networks
Or data. They are, for all intents and purposes, the digital spies, the saboteurs, and the special forces of the modern age.
And when we refer to infrastructure, we're talking about the things that keep
Society running, right? The absolute basics.
Precisely. Infrastructure is the fundamental life support of a modern society. You have to think of the basic physical and organizational structures that need to function. So, electricity grids, water purification and delivery systems, transportation networks, telecommunications, financial systems.
And attacking that infrastructure is an attempt to cause a systemic failure, to make a country's ability to exist safely just.
Stop.
That's the goal.
So, given this constant high-stakes digital warfare, where does the United States stand today? We know they helped initiate the sophisticated offense with Stuxnet, but what about on the defensive side?
The U.S. role is absolutely critical on defense, and it's a constant, deep collaboration. America maintains, without a doubt, the most technologically advanced digital defense and offense organizations in the world, and they're centralized under what's called Cyber Command.
And Cyber Command actively helps Israel.
Actively and daily. They assist Israel in defending against the constant influx of digital attacks from Iranian state actors and their proxies.
How does that assistance actually, work in practice? What are they doing?
Well, a huge part of it is constant, massive threat intelligence sharing. Cyber Command processes these enormous amounts of global internet traffic data. They actively track adversarial hacking groups. They share these real-time feeds of attack signatures and newly discovered vulnerabilities with their Israeli counterparts.
So it's like an early warning system.
A very advanced one. This collaboration provides advanced defensive tools and helps them neutralize incoming threats much more rapidly. In effect, it ensures Israel is shielded by some of the most advanced cyber capabilities on the planet.
So the core takeaway for you here is that even when the geopolitical news seems, quiet on the surface, a continuous daily digital Cold War is just raging online.
That is the reality. It's constant and it's strategic. Every single vulnerability in a network, every missed software
Patch becomes a potential doorway for a hostile state actor. It demands this 24/7 high-level technical collaboration because the failure point isn't just a compromised computer anymore.
It's the potential failure of the city's basic system.
Exactly.
Okay, so if code is used to exploit vulnerabilities in hardware, our second pillar exploits the oldest vulnerability of all, human nature and the desire for secrets. Let's pivot now from fighting with code to fighting with secrets. This brings us to pillar 2, espionage, the classic game of shadows. And this is the domain where the conflict truly becomes, almost indistinguishable from a high-stakes thriller.
Yeah, it really does. The definition of espionage is, on the surface, straightforward. It's spying. It's the practice of obtaining secret information about an enemy. But the way it's executed in this region is just ruthlessly efficient and incredibly high stakes. The fundamental dynamic is one of constant intelligence penetration and counter-penetration. Both sides are desperately trying to learn the other's critical operational details, their political weaknesses, their future strategic plans.
And in this theater,
When a state decides it needs to act on that intelligence, it often requires a covert operation. What's the functional difference between that and just a regular military mission?
A covert operation is a secret mission.
Mission that is specifically designed so that its ultimate sponsor, the country that's running it, can plausibly deny any involvement.
Plausible deniability.
That's the key phrase. The action is hidden, and while everyone, in the intelligence community might suspect who is responsible, there is no smoking gun. And that's vital for maintaining a kind of diplomatic ambiguity and preventing an open declaration of war, even when the actions themselves are incredibly aggressive.
When we look at Israel's role in this realm, the intelligence prowess of the Mossad is just legendary. It's almost mythologized. They're Israel's famous foreign intelligence agency, and they are known specifically for carrying out these high-profile, aggressive, and often kinetic secret operations deep inside Iranian territory.
And the most dramatic and frankly concerning evidence of this activity over the past decade or so has been the campaign targeting Iran's scientific talent.
Intelligence reports confirm that several top Iranian nuclear physicists, engineers, and program managers have been assassinated, killed within Iran's borders. And these were not random acts. These were
Meticulously coordinated, precise strikes, often using highly specialized techniques.
Can you give us some insight into the methodology? I mean, we're not talking about standard military rates here, are we?
No, not at all. These assassinations have been carried out using techniques that are designed to maximize that deniability while minimizing any collateral damage. So examples that are cited in the sources include things like sophisticated magnetized sticky bombs being attached to a victim's car at a traffic light by an operative on a motorcycle who then disappears, or highly accurate remote-controlled machine guns placed on parked vehicles.
Remote control.
Yes, or just very targeted ambushes carried out with immense precision by
operatives who just vanish almost immediately. The level of sophistication indicates deep operational logistics and, crucially, a lot of local intelligence penetration. They have people on the ground.
And Tehran's accusations are always immediate, and they're always aimed directly at the Mossad. So what is the overarching strategic goal behind eliminating these specific non-combatant scientists?
The goal is what's known as targeting human capital. If you can remove the central knowledge holders, the senior engineers, the physicists, the program managers who have that unique, irreplaceable expertise to design and integrate these complex systems, you can delay a project like a nuclear weapons program significantly, even if all the physical facilities are left completely undamaged.
So it's a campaign against knowledge itself.
That's a great way to put it. It's designed to create a gap in generational expertise that can take years, sometimes a
decade to fill.
And it's a brutal but very high-leverage strategy. It forces Iran to divert substantial resources into continuous internal security,
protecting its top scientific talent. And that, I imagine, naturally increases internal paranoia and strains the national budget.
It creates a climate of fear and suspicion within those critical technological sectors. When your best and brightest scientists start fearing for their lives, their focus inevitably shifts from innovation and development to just personal security, and that will always slow progress.
Now, Iran, of course, has its own intelligence networks designed to counter these threats and to fight back. What are their primary objectives?
Iran's intelligence efforts are really twofold. You have internal counterintelligence, which is all about detecting Israeli penetration and rooting out collaborators, and then you have external intelligence gathering. Externally, their objectives include obtaining crucial information on Israeli military bases, tracking the operational readiness and movements of American troops stationed across the Middle East,
and really understanding the minute details of the strategic alliance between the U.S. and Israel. They are constantly looking for real-time vulnerabilities.
And when they gather this information, their
methodology often seems to rely very heavily on human networks, on trying to recruit people who have access to sensitive areas.
That's right, and that's where the classic, human drama of spying really comes into play. They're actively trying to recruit individuals to serve as informants or as double agents. They'll target people based on ideological sympathy, or much more often by leveraging financial hardship or some kind of personal grievance. These agents can provide that vital on-the-ground intelligence, what we call human intelligence, that satellites and drones can never capture.
Things like unit morale.
Exactly.
Or specific operational procedures, or even internal political disagreements among key decision makers. The stuff you can only learn from a person.
So this constant hidden game of obtaining and
protecting secrets is fundamentally shaping the conflict. And here, just like in the cyber domain, the U.S. involvement is deep and indispensable.
The U.S. really functions as the primary technological and data engine for this intelligence war. The U.S. amounts of intelligence, and we should define that accurately here. It's not just simple raw data. It's vetted, processed, and analyzed information used specifically for high-level military and political decision-making.
And that intelligence sharing with Israel is comprehensive.
It is.
Give us a sense of the scope of this technological intelligence. What kind of tools are we talking about?
Well, the primary tools include high-resolution satellites, which provide what's called IMMT, or imagery intelligence, so very detailed pictures of installations and movements from space. And then advanced SIGINT, which is signals intelligence.
Intercepting communications.
Intercepting and analyzing electronic communications and signals, yes. This data allows both the U.S. and Israel to monitor Iranian activity with a level of accuracy and depth that would be, frankly, impossible for Israel to achieve on its own.
So what you're describing is a seamless integration of this high-tech surveillance with the on-the-ground human intelligence.
Exactly. You combine the eye in the sky, the satellites and drones that are providing real-time surveillance of troop movements and facilities, with the ears on the ground, the human spies.
Yeah.
And this synthesis is what allows the U.S. and Israel to maintain a very significant ongoing intelligence advantage. And that shapes the entire conflict. It allows them to predict actions, to neutralize threats, or to plan these incredibly complex operations like Stuxnet long before the public is even aware that they were ever conceived.
Okay, let's shift gears now to what is
Arguably the most powerful, yet maybe the least dramatic, non-kinetic weapon the U.S. has. This is Pillar 3, economic warfare. Fighting not with bombs or code or spies, but with
the global financial system itself.
This is a truly sophisticated and often devastating application of financial power. The term we use here is sanctions, and a sanction is basically an economic or political penalty applied by one country or a coalition of countries to another nation. And the goal is to compel a change in policy or behavior without having to resort to military force.
And this power dynamic, it seems to rely entirely on the U.S. dollar and the sheer dominance of the American economy. Why does that give the U.S. such disproportionate financial leverage?
The U.S. holds this power because the U.S. dollar is the world's primary reserve currency. Critically, almost all major international transactions, especially for global commodities like oil, they have to be cleared or processed through financial systems that are either regulated by U.S. law or rely on access to the U.S. dollar clearing network.
So the U.S. doesn't need to send the Navy to block a port. It just blocks the money transfer that's needed to pay for whatever is in the port.
That is precisely right. And the ultimate leverage is the threat of what's called
Called secondary sanctions. The ultimatum, as the sources define it, is delivered to the entire global market, and it's very simple. If you want to maintain access to the U.S. economy, the massive American market, and the U.S. dollar financial system, you absolutely cannot do business with Iran.
And because the U.S. economy is so dominant, every major country, every international bank, they have to make a choice. And that choice is almost always to adhere to the U.S. sanctions. And the result is Iran's severe financial isolation.
And the system that underpins this isolation is called SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. SWIFT is like the global nervous system for financial messaging.
It's how banks talk to each other.
It's how they all talk to each other globally. By threatening to cut off access to SWIFT,
any bank that deals with sanctioned Iranian entities, the U.S. can effectively paralyze Iran's ability to conduct any legitimate, large-scale international trade.
And this has immediate and just crippling economic consequences, especially for Iran's most valuable product, which is oil. I mean, they have these vast reserves, but the sanctions make that asset almost useless.
oil is the economic lifeblood of the Iranian state. It's responsible for a huge percentage of their government revenue. But because international banks refuse to process transactions that involve sanctioned Iranian entities, selling that oil legally and getting paid for it is almost impossible. And the revenues that Iran does manage to generate are often trapped in foreign accounts. Or the oil has to be sold at these vastly discounted rates to risk-tolerant buyers. It just cripples the national budget's ability to fund anything.
And the result of that crippling budget shortfall isn't abstract. It bleeds directly into the lives of ordinary citizens. I think the most visible consequence is the dramatic drop in the value of
Iran's currency, the rial.
The currency collapse has been catastrophic over the last few years, and when the rial loses its value, it causes this massive runaway inflation.
Let's define inflation for you here. It just means prices are going up extremely fast, sometimes doubling or tripling in a single year, while the purchasing power of money just plummets.
And if the currency becomes worthless, goods that have to be imported, like, specialized medical supplies, spare parts for infrastructure, raw materials for manufacturing, they become prohibitively expensive almost overnight.
So this economic weakness that's created by the sanctions, it disproportionately hurts ordinary non-combatant people.
It does. I mean, these are people who are not involved in the nuclear program or supporting proxy forces, but they are the ones facing hyperinflation on basic necessities like food, housing, and medicine. And this is the critical and often debated humanitarian implication of using sanctions as a tool of statecraft.
So despite those moral questions, the strategic objective from the perspective of the U.S. and Israel, it remains very clear: to squeeze the Iranian economy so severely that the government simply does not have enough hard currency, enough dollars or euros, to fund its strategic programs.
Right, to stop them from developing ballistic missiles or nuclear weapons, or to stop them from supporting their allied groups like Hezbollah or Hamas, which are deemed proxy forces. It's an attempt to choke off the financing for key state priorities by making day-to-day survival the primary objective of the regime. The goal is to create so much internal pressure that the regime has to choose between economic collapse and changing its geopolitical behavior.
But Iran is a very resilient country, and it's a major economy. So it has developed
Survival tactics to resist this total financial isolation. What are the two primary ways they're trying to keep their economy afloat?
They employ a pretty sophisticated
Two-pronged approach. First, they operate extensively through the black market, and we shouldn't think of this as just disorganized crime. This is a sophisticated state-level apparatus that is focused on circumventing those official international systems.
How does that circumvention actually work for something as big as the oil trade? I mean, that's not easy to hide.
No, it's not. They utilize what are called ghost fleets oil tankers that will turn off their GPS transponders for long periods to hide their location and their identity. They also engage in these complex ship-to-ship transfers out in open water to obscure the origin of the oil.
And how do they get paid?
Payment is often facilitated through layers of these opaque shell companies that are based in friendly or neutral jurisdictions. Sometimes it involves cryptocurrency or even complex barter arrangements rather than relying on U.S.
controlled banks. They have to sell the oil at a discount, but at least they're generating some revenue.
So they're using all these unofficial channels to get access to the global market, sacrificing price for liquidity.
And just survival. What's the second, more national strategy?
The second strategy is the development of what Iran calls the resistance economy. This is a deliberate long-term economic model focused on dramatically reducing the country's dependence on imports and on the global financial system. The strategy dictates maximum self-sufficiency,
So making everything at home?
pushing domestic production of everything from basic foodstuffs and consumer goods to specialized industrial equipment and even military parts. It shifts the entire economic focus inward. The goal is to make the country structurally less vulnerable to external economic pressure over time. The logic is simple. If we don't need your imports, your sanctions lose their bite. It's a strategic effort to decouple from that Western-centric financial architecture and maintain some economic sovereignty. It was born out of necessity,
But it's now become this core ideology.
It's a really remarkable illustration of how a modern conflict isn't just about who has the biggest military budget. It's about who has the most control over the
Global financial levers, and who has the most resilient system to withstand that coercion. And what's truly fascinating is how intertwined these three pillars really are.
The sanctions create economic desperation, which provides the ideal conditions for espionage recruitment. And the digital front, cyber warfare, is used both to enforce sanctions by tracking illegal money flows and to disrupt Iran's internal efforts at self-sufficiency. They all reinforce each other in this total conflict environment.
So we've covered the three heavy hitters: cyber, espionage, and economic warfare. But there is a fourth front, and it's the one that dictates how the public perceives all these other battles. And that's
information warfare, or we can just call the media war. This is where truth itself becomes a weapon.
This is absolutely crucial, because winning the physical battle or the financial battle,
That's only half the fight. The other half is the battle for public opinion, the global narrative. In today's hyper-connected world, controlling the story about why the conflict is happening, who the aggressor is, and who the victim is, that's considered vital for maintaining international legitimacy and for garnering internal support.
and both sides are fighting tooth and nail to control that narrative, using every single communication tool they have.
This is what's broadly known as propaganda or information warfare. And the goal here is not to inform you objectively. The goal is to persuade, to manipulate, and to generate very specific emotional reactions. Each side attempts rigorously to portray itself as the purely innocent victim of external aggression, and the opposing side as the morally bankrupt destabilizing villain who's responsible for all the violence.
How does that actually manifest in the content we all see?
Well, it takes some very sophisticated forms.
On Iran's side, you'll have state-sponsored media outlets, both their international and domestic channels, and they'll focus heavily on portraying the U.S. and Israel as these colonial powers that are inflicting cruelty
On civilians through sanctions. They'll highlight the assassinations as acts of state terrorism. They frame all of their activities, including their support for proxy groups, purely as resistance against occupation or interference.
And on the U.S. and Israeli side?
Their media strategy tends to focus more on intelligence leaks and detailed reports about Iran's malign activities, their nuclear ambitions, ballistic missile proliferation, support for terror groups. They use precise, verified, or at least verifiable data to paint a picture of a rogue regime that is the primary source of all regional instability. And that, in turn, justifies the cyber operations, the espionage, and the crippling sanctions.
And beyond just traditional media, we have to consider the impact of social media campaigns and disinformation.
Social media is now a central battlefield. We see these coordinated efforts using armies of bots and state-aligned trolls to amplify specific narratives, to target dissenting voices, and to generate content. And sometimes this includes cleverly crafted deepfakes, all to sow discord and confusion within the adversary's society.
What kind of things?
They might push fake news about leadership instability or military failures, or maybe inflated casualty reports just to undermine morale.
This manipulation of information is so pervasive and so subtle. So what is the critical task for you, the citizen, who's just trying to stay informed, to navigate this minefield of competing narratives?
Well, it raises a profound question about digital literacy, doesn't it? The critical task for you is to recognize that you are a direct target of this information warfare, and therefore it is absolutely essential to actively check, cross-reference, and triangulate information from multiple diverse sources.
So don't just rely on state media from one side or the other.
Absolutely not. You have to assume that any piece of information that seems too simple, too morally absolute, or just too emotionally charged
Is likely being strategically deployed for a reason.
So it demands a much more active role from the audience, not just passive consumption, but real critical scrutiny of the source, the message, and the underlying motivation.
Exactly. Understanding the sophisticated tactics of cyber attacks, assassinations, and sanctions requires you to also recognize that the justifications and the narratives that come with them are also strategically deployed weapons, and they're often aimed squarely at influencing global policy decisions and your public sympathy.
So after this deep dive, what does the synthesis of this total conflict look like?
I think we get a much more comprehensive, three-dimensional view of modern warfare. The synthesis confirms that this isn't a single definable
conflict. It's a constant, interconnected strategic effort that's being fought simultaneously on all these non-kinetic fronts. Cyber attacks degrade an industrial capacity. Espionage
eliminates scientific talent and gathers that crucial intelligence, and economic sanctions starve the state of the funds it needs to pursue its strategic goals.
This holistic approach gives you a far more complex and I think a more accurate view of this modern silent war than any single headline could ever convey.
Before we move on to our final thought, let's just quickly review the 5 most important strategic and technical terms we've covered today, just to make sure these concepts really stick with you.
Okay, number 1. Cyber warfare. This is fighting using advanced computers and the internet to cause specific physical or informational damage, and it often targets those industrial control systems.
Number 2, espionage, the practice of spying. It involves the clandestine collection of secrets, often through a blend of high-tech surveillance like SIGINT and human networks, or HUMINT.
3 is sanctions. These are the economic penalties applied to severely punish or coerce a country into changing specific geopolitical behaviors.
4 is infrastructure. The basic essential systems, water, electricity, transport, finance, all the things necessary for a complex society to function.
And finally, number 5, covert operation. A secret mission designed specifically so that its sponsor can maintain plausible deniability. This allows for aggressive action without triggering an open declaration of war. Those are the fundamental tools of this modern geopolitical struggle. We really hope this deep dive has given you a much clearer lens through which to view these ongoing complex events.
Now we want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something that builds on the challenging material we just absorbed,
particularly concerning economic warfare. We detailed how sanctions are designed to pressure a hostile government, but we also acknowledge that they primarily hurt ordinary, non-combatant citizens through inflation and scarcity.
and this leads to a fundamental question of strategic morality.
Do you believe economic sanctions in this context constitute a fair and effective way to fight a conflict, given that unavoidable humanitarian cost to the general population?
It's a difficult strategic and moral reckoning. It weighs effectiveness against humanitarian damage, and it requires some serious reflection on whether this specific form of coercion actually achieves its long-term goals, or if it simply breeds deep, long-lasting resentment.
We encourage you to continue exploring the impact of these silent battles on the world stage and to always question the narratives you consume.
Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring the nuances of global power dynamics.
Goodbye, everyone. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission is, well, it's pretty simple. We take the most complex stories happening all over the world, we stack up the expert sources, and we give you the distilled knowledge.
The why and the so what.
Exactly. The things that connect these distant events directly to your life. We know you're here because you want to go beyond the headlines.
And today, we are doing a deep dive into one of the most, I'd say, persistent and volatile conflicts of our time.
Yeah.
The tension between Iran and Israel. The sources on this are, well, they're vast. They cover everything from ideology to military tech.
But our focus today is entirely forward-looking. It's global.
Mm-hmm.
We're really trying to answer that fundamental question that you might be asking yourself, whether you're listening to Buenos Aires or London or Tokyo.
Or Johannesburg. Anywhere.
Right. And the question is, why does this matter to me? I mean, this conflict is happening so far away in the Middle East, it doesn't seem like it affects my daily life.
No.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because the source material makes a very strong, a very clear, and frankly, a startling argument. The truth is, this conflict has the potential to fundamentally reshape the world economy, global security, and even your own personal finances.
That perceived distance, it really is an illusion.
Mhm.
We've distilled the sources down into 3 critical interlocking themes that show why this regional conflict is, in practice, a global event.
So we're moving past the headlines to connect the dots.
Exactly.
Our deep dive roadmap starts with the geopolitical side of things. So section 1 is this complicated network of global alliances. Think of it like a gigantic international chessboard, where a move in Tehran or Jerusalem instantly affects Washington, Moscow, and Beijing.
Then for our second section, we shift immediately to something, well, more tangible, the economic pain. We're talking about the threat to energy security and the direct impact it would have on global inflation and, your wallet.
Right.
We'll get really granular on supply chains and specific geographical choke points.
And finally, we have to address the scariest concept, which is nuclear proliferation. The existential risk that turns a regional problem into a catastrophic global arms race. So we're looking for those surprising, essential connections.
And I think we need to start where the world's great powers intersect, with that web of alliances.
Okay, so the sources use this analogy it's perfect. A
Yeah.
giant game of chess. Iran and Israel are these main pieces, but they are absolutely not playing this game alone.
No, not at all.
So we need to define the major players who are, moving these pieces.
Yeah.
Because this is where a regional spat becomes a global crisis. Let's start with the baseline, the thing everyone knows. The United States has this foundational, decades-long security commitment to Israel.
Right. Billions in military aid, crucial diplomatic backing. It's a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy.
But the game changes completely when you look at the other side of the board. Who is moving the pieces for Iran?
That is the pivot point. And what's fascinating here is that Iran, despite facing this intense international isolation, all these sanctions, has successfully cultivated these deep, multi-layered partnerships with major world powers.
We're talking Russia and China.
Russia and China, who fundamentally stand in opposition to the U.S. and European power structures. And these aren't, temporary conveniences. These are strategic, long-term relationships built on some profound mutual benefit.
And a shared desire to reorganize the global balance of power.
100%.
So let's start with the Iran-Russia partnership. This alliance is very much in the public eye now, especially with the conflict in Ukraine. The sources detail that these two have become strategic partners, especially in places like Syria, right? Propping up the Assad regime.
Yes, Syria was a key testing ground for their cooperation, but the source material gets much more granular on the military relationship itself.
How so?
Well, the sources confirm it's overtly military, and it's getting more and more sophisticated. We know for a fact Russia sells advanced military equipment to Iran, which is crucial for Iran's defense.
And we're not talking about old Soviet gear.
No.
No.
There's been extensive discussion, a lot of it from intelligence assessments about potential transfers of advanced Russian air defense systems. We're talking S-300s or maybe even variations of the S-400 missile system.
Wow. Okay, so if Iran gets those, what does that change?
It changes everything. It drastically complicates any potential Israeli or American air operations in the region. It just fundamentally changes the calculation for air superiority.
That's an enormous strategic shift. It means the U.S. can't just assume air dominance if a conflict breaks out.
It can't. And beyond just selling hardware, the sources also highlight this operational partnership. You see Iranian-made weapons, specifically the Shahed drones,
We've all seen footage of those.
being used extensively by Russia in Ukraine. So this is just a two-way street, a two-way exchange of military tech and battlefield experience.
So it's a dynamic, synergistic alliance.
Absolutely. For Russia, supporting Iran it's a very calculated and highly effective way to reduce American influence in the Middle East. It diverts global attention, and it secures a supply chain for its own military needs. It's a powerful counterweight in a critical region.
So the goal is friction, to make the Middle East a costlier, riskier place for Washington to operate.
That's the heart of it, and that immediately complicates any conflict, because now the military supply chain for one regional power is actively backed by a global power that has its own, scores to settle with NATO and the West.
But then you bring China into the mix, and the complexity just ramps up exponentially. And the focus shifts, right, from military hardware to hard economic necessity.
It does. China's role is primarily economic, but that translates directly and very powerfully into geopolitical power. The sources are crystal clear on this. China is Iran's biggest trading partner.
A relationship that essentially acts as a financial life support system.
Exactly. This partnership is what allows Iran to circumvent, or at least dramatically, reduce the impact of American sanctions that are designed to cripple its economy.
Okay, let's get specific here for the listener. The U.S. uses the dollar to impose sanctions, right, to try and starve the Iranian regime of oil revenue. So if China is buying huge amounts of oil, which the sources say they are, how does Iran actually get paid without using U.S.-controlled financial systems? How do they dodge that blow?
We're talking about these really sophisticated evasion mechanisms. People sometimes call it the silent war of economic maneuvering. So first, China often just uses its own currency, the renminbi, for these transactions. That completely bypasses the U.S.-dominated SWIFT system.
Okay, that makes sense.
But second, and this is maybe more important, the sources point to the use of this massive, opaque shadow fleet.
A shadow fleet.
Hundreds of aging oil tankers operating without the typical maritime tracking or insurance. These ships carry sanctioned Iranian oil, and they often blend it with oil from other places to disguise where it came from.
So Iran's main revenue stream, which should be blocked by U.S. policy, is kept alive by China's need for energy and its willingness to look the other way on this clandestine trade.
It's more than looking the other way. China is basically providing a dedicated financial pressure shield. The money keeps flowing in, providing that essential hard currency for the government, for military spending, and for continued nuclear research.
So the U.S. policy tool of sanctions, the main non-military strategy, is blunted.
Significantly blunted, yes.
And this commitment isn't just a handshake deal. It's cemented in a document that screams long-term strategic alignment. That comprehensive 25-year
cooperation agreement between them.
That's right. The sources really emphasize the sheer scale and the longevity of this deal. It's reportedly valued at over $400 billion, and it's not just about oil.
So what else is in it?
It promises a huge Chinese investment across Iran's core infrastructure. We're talking about building ports, high-speed rail lines to connect Iran to China's Belt and Road Initiative, and crucially developing Iran's 5G telecommunications networks.
Infrastructure and technology. That locks Iran into China's economic orbit for a generation. And it also gives China deep access into Iranian systems.
Precisely. It signals a long-term alignment that goes so far beyond simple oil deals. It implies deep integration for a quarter century. This relationship just fundamentally anchors Iran against external pressure. It makes it almost impossible for the West to collapse the Iranian economy just through sanctions.
So if we look at this whole picture, the U.S. backing Israel,
Iran, backed by Russian military tech and Chinese economic lifelines, we have to define the ultimate risk. The key concept here isn't just alliance, a partnership for mutual benefit.
The sources seem to be pointing to something else, the concept of entrapment.
That is the critical term. An alliance is supposed to provide deterrence, right? It makes the other side think twice before attacking. But entrapment means the alliance guarantees that if a war does start between the two regional players, Iran and Israel, then the giant global players, the U.S., Russia, China, will be pulled in, maybe even against yes, it will.
So the sources are warning that because of these deep economic and military dependencies, a war starting between Iran and Israel just wouldn't stay regional. The major powers are too invested, militarily and economically, to sit on the sidelines.
They'd be forced to support their allies. Through proxy warfare, massive diplomatic interventions, maybe even direct military aid. And that leads to immediate escalation.
So the risk is no longer about Tehran and Jerusalem. It's about a potential miscalculation in the Gulf that spirals into a direct strategic confrontation between Washington and Moscow, or Washington and Beijing.
Exactly. The regional conflict becomes the tripwire for a global crisis. And that realization, that fear, it moves us perfectly into our second theme. The immediate economic consequences that hit much closer to home for every single person listening.
All right, so we've moved from that high-stakes world of geopolitics to something that, well, it impacts everyone's wallet directly.
Yeah.
Oil and energy. This is the economic shockwave that proves this conflict's global relevance is not theoretical, it's imminent, and it's measurable.
To understand the shockwave, you really have to understand the specific geographical vulnerability of the Middle East. I mean, it produces a massive amount of the world's oil, but getting that oil to the global market depends on a few key, very narrow bottlenecks.
And one choke point dominates all the others.
It does. The Strait of Hormuz.
Can you get granular on the physical reality of this place? What does it actually look like?
The sources paint a pretty stark picture. The Strait of Hormuz is so critical because it's the only sea passage from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean, and it is incredibly narrow. At its tightest point, the shipping lanes are only about 20 miles wide.
20 miles, that's nothing.
It makes it highly defensible. And it means that almost all the maritime oil shipments from the major OPEC producers, we're talking Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, all of it, has to pass through this single constricted channel.
That concentration of supply is what makes it so vulnerable. Can you put a number on that? How critical is it?
The numbers are staggering. The sources quantified it. Approximately 20% of the entire world's daily oil consumption passes through this narrow channel on ships.
20%, one-fifth.
One-fifth. It's not just a huge portion of global energy. It is the single largest maritime concentration of global energy supply in one place on the planet.
So one-fifth of the world's energy supply is flowing right past Iran's front door, essentially. It gives Tehran this incredible strategic leverage, which they've
Repeatedly threatened to use. But the question is that an idle threat, or is it a credible military action?
Oh, it's a highly credible threat. The sources confirm that Iran has publicly
Stated many times that if they are attacked, they could close the Strait of Hormuz, and the methods they've mentioned are specific, detailed, and they're asymmetric.
What does that mean, asymmetric?
It means they don't need a huge, modern naval fleet to do it. They can use cheaper, simpler weapons to counter a much more powerful force.
So what specific capabilities are we talking about?
a combination of things. First, naval mines. They could lay them quickly in the shipping lanes, which would make passage just too risky for these huge commercial tankers.
Okay.
Second, they have shore-based anti-ship missile batteries that can target these slow-moving ships. And then, perhaps most dangerously, they have fleets of fast, small attack boats that could launch a coordinated swarm attack on commercial shipping.
And that would make the insurance costs.
Yeah.
They just go through the roof.
Exactly. The war risk premiums would become prohibitively high. You could effectively stop commerce without even sinking a single ship. So no, this isn't idle speculation. It's a stated strategic threat aimed at global economic disruption.
That brings up a critical point. If Iran makes that threat real, if the strait is closed even for a few days, what are the immediate consequences that ripple outward?
The chain reaction is simple, it's immediate, and it is absolutely unavoidable. The world's supply of oil would instantly stop or be severely curtailed. Even just the threat of a closure causes oil futures to spike instantly.
But a confirmed closure is a catastrophe.
It is. This is where we apply basic supply-side economics. It's a non-negotiable global law. When a huge portion of supply disappears overnight, prices explode.
And that price increase. We're not talking about a few cents at the pump. The loss of 20% of global supply overnight would trigger what the sources define as guaranteed global inflation.
And we need to be precise about what kind of inflation. This isn't the kind caused by too much demand. This is a severe supply shock driven by energy costs. Economists would immediately start to fear the risk of stagflation.
Stagflation, that's a dangerous combination.
It's the worst combination, high inflation and low economic growth. It's the scenario that defined the very painful energy crises back in the 1970s.
And that's the crucial link we need to trace back to the listener, because this is so much bigger than just filling up your gas tank.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the entire global logistics chain. If you drive a car in Europe, sure, the price of gasoline skyrockets. But what if you own a trucking company in North America? Your freight costs multiply tenfold. If you buy goods shipped from Asia, electronics, clothes, even basic manufacturing parts, the container shipping companies have to pay exponentially more for their fuel. They don't absorb that cost. They pass that war risk and fuel surcharge directly onto you, the consumer.
So if I'm listening in Mumbai or Berlin, the impact isn't just at the pump, it's everywhere. An oil shock cascades very quickly into a severe cost of living crisis.
Exactly. Virtually everything you consume, from food grown with diesel-powered farm equipment to medicine shipped via air freight, it all involves transport and manufacturing fueled by oil. So if the price of crude explodes to, say, $150 or $200 a barrel, so does the cost of everything else. The sources are unequivocal. A conflict between Iran and Israel could directly make basic groceries more expensive in your local supermarket, no matter where you live.
That level of vulnerability makes you wonder why there aren't major alternative routes already in place to bypass Hormuz. Do the sources talk about any efforts to mitigate this?
They do, but they also highlight the limitations. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have built alternative pipelines, like the massive East-West pipeline that moves crude to the Red Sea coast, precisely for this reason. It gives them some contingency.
Okay.
But those pipelines have a finite, limited capacity. Even if they were running at 100% efficiency, they could not possibly absorb the 20 million barrels per day that transit Hormuz.
So they're useful buffers, but they are not a full replacement. The world is still, for all intents and purposes, a geographical hostage to that 20-mile strip of water.
Correct. And let's not forget the financial fallout. Even if the oil keeps flowing, the sources note the immediate and astronomical increase in marine insurance costs. Tankers entering the Gulf instantly get hit with massive war risk premiums.
And that cost gets baked into the price of every barrel long before a shot is even fired.
It does. It transforms the conflict from a geopolitical matter into a cost of living crisis for billions of people. This realization is why the Strait of Hormuz is considered one of the single most crucial choke points in the entire global economic system.
The economic ripple effect is huge. But as devastating as an oil shock would be, it pales in comparison to the subject of our next section, the one that deals not just with economic stability, but with existential risk, the nuclear equation.
So let's shift our focus now to the most dangerous long-term global consequence that's outlined in the source material, and that's the potential for a rapid, uncontrolled spread of nuclear weapons across the world's most volatile region.
This is the concept of nuclear proliferation. That is an incredibly heavy phrase, and for our audience, we need to define it precisely in this specific context.
Right. So proliferation, as the sources discuss it, refers specifically to the spread of nuclear weapons technology to more countries, and that could potentially trigger a regional arms race. This whole concept is supposed to be governed by the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
A cornerstone of global security.
It is, but in the Middle East, that NPT framework is deeply strained because of the current status quo, which we have to establish first.
Let's start with Israel. The sources discuss Israel's presumed status.
Israel maintains this long-standing policy of nuclear ambiguity. It's widely believed by intelligence agencies, by military analysts, to possess nuclear weapons capability, but they've never officially admitted it.
And that ambiguity is a strategy.
It's a powerful deterrent. It forces any potential adversary to calculate the possibility of a devastating second strike response. And that baseline capability, it fundamentally dictates the security planning of all of its neighbors.
Okay, now let's turn to Iran, which is the flashpoint here. Iran officially states its nuclear program is peaceful. It's for energy, for medical research, all permitted under the NPT. But where do the concerns from Western intelligence and diplomatic sources really focus?
The sources focus on Iran's activities in enriching uranium. Western countries believe that Iran is steadily reducing its breakout time.
Breakout time, what does that mean exactly?
It's the theoretical time needed to gather enough fissile material to build a crude nuclear device. So while Iran continues to, adhere to some NPT guidelines, the sources highlight this deep distrust around the scale of its enrichment levels. They're enriching far beyond what's needed for civilian power generation.
So this lack of certainty, this deep distrust, One side with a presumed bomb, the other widely suspected of chasing one. This is what creates the instability. So why is Iran getting a bomb not just a regional issue, but a global one? This is the core of the domino effect laid out in the sources.
If Iran acquires a functioning nuclear weapon, it instantly shatters the entire regional balance of power. The sources describe this through the lens of something called the security dilemma.
The security dilemma.
Right. It means what one nation does to increase its own security, like getting a bomb, instantly and drastically decreases the security of its rivals. And that forces them to respond.
And who are the regional actors that the sources identify who would immediately see this as an existential threat?
The sources explicitly point to countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt. These are powerful regional players. Many are already engaged in proxy struggles with Tehran. For them, an Iranian bomb isn't just about defending against Israel, it's about protecting their own sovereignty and regional influence against a newly empowered Iran.
Let's focus on Saudi Arabia for a second, a key U.S. partner. What would their defensive conclusion likely be, according to the sources?
Their conclusion, driven by survival and deterrence, would almost certainly be, if our primary rival, Iran, has a bomb, then we need one too for our own protection.
And could they do it?
The sources note that Saudi Arabia has significant financial resources, and they've indicated in the past they would pursue a nuclear capability if Iran crossed that threshold. This could involve accelerating their own civilian nuclear program toward a military one, or maybe even trying to purchase one off the shelf from an existing nuclear state.
The terrifying consequence is just the multiplication of risk. Instead of one or two countries having these uniquely dangerous weapons, the Middle East could suddenly have 5 or 6 nuclear states. In a region defined by ancient rivalries and deep mistrust, that's the domino effect in action.
And the source material is unequivocal on this. Every additional nation that gets nuclear weapons dramatically increases the risk of a terrible accident, unauthorized use, or a catastrophic miscalculation escalating into a nuclear exchange.
More actors means more chances for things to go wrong.
Exactly. More opportunity for technical failure, for political instability leading to a regime change, or just simple human error. The global stability that was established, imperfectly during the Cold War, it breaks down completely when too many hands are on the buttons.
And this nightmare scenario brings us back to the massive diplomatic efforts and failures of the past decade. This potential arms race is precisely why the U.S. and Europe work so hard on these agreements. The sources implicitly reference the failure of the JCPOA.
The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. That's the vital context. The JCPOA, negotiated by the P5+1, the 5 permanent UN Security Council members, plus Germany, it was designed specifically to prevent this domino effect.
How did it work?
It traded economic sanctions relief for severe verifiable limits on Iran's enrichment activities, and it allowed for these intensive inspections and monitoring by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency.
But then the U.S. withdrew.
When the U.S. withdrew from the agreement and Iran subsequently ramped up its enrichment again, the threat of proliferation immediately intensified. It just proved how fragile that status quo really is.
So the stability of the entire region, and by extension, the world economy and global security, it all hinges on the success or failure of stopping Iran from crossing that final technological line. It's the existential risk that demands constant international attention. We have spent a lot of time painting a pretty sobering picture. Global alliances that guarantee escalation, economic shockwaves from a single choke point, the risk of a nuclear arms race.
It's a dark picture. It is.
Which is why we have to pivot now, just as the source material does, to the constructive path, the crucial role of diplomacy and mediation.
The sheer scale of the potential disaster is often the greatest incentive for cooperation. And the good news, if there is any, is that diplomacy is still very much alive. The sources highlight that despite all the constant, bellicose rhetoric, channels of communication, both public and secret, they do remain open.
Let's establish the term clearly. Diplomacy, for our audience, it's not just polite conversation.
No. Diplomacy is this complex mechanism states use to try and resolve disagreements without resorting to force. It often involves these detailed technical negotiations. And crucially, the sources point out that even among the hardliners in Tehran, Jerusalem, and Washington, there is a shared rational desire to avoid a war that would be devastating for everyone.
And that shared desire for de-escalation is the essential foundation for any negotiation.
It has to be.
But when two sides, like Tehran and Washington, don't speak directly or refuse to be seen speaking directly, you need intermediaries, You need people who can build trust and bridge that gap. And that's where the mediators come in, practicing what's often called shuttle diplomacy.
A mediator is defined as a person or a country who tries to help two hostile sides come to an agreement. They act as these essential, trusted, and above all, neutral messengers. And in this specific, complex conflict, the sources identify three key players who currently fill this very delicate role: Oman, Qatar, and Switzerland.
Those three nations occupy very different niches in this landscape. Oman and Qatar are Gulf states, but they maintain these functional, working relationships with Iran that gives them the necessary access and credibility in Tehran.
Right. Qatar, for example, has leveraged its unique position. I mean, it's a major U.S. military host and a dialogue partner for Iran to facilitate crucial financial transfers and, historically, the release of foreign nationals. They handle the technical, sensitive aspects.
In Oman.
Oman has long acted as the quiet, traditional back channel, hosting secret meetings, passing sensitive military and strategic messages between senior U.S. and Iranian officials.
And then there's Switzerland, internationally known for their strict neutrality. They act as a protecting power.
Switzerland performs the more formal diplomatic function. They often represent U.S. interests in Tehran, since the U.S. and Iran severed ties decades ago. Their function is logistical, but it is vital. They make sure consular affairs are managed, and, more critically, they carry official diplomatic notes and messages back and forth.
Tehran to Washington.
Exactly. It allows formal communications to happen even when direct talks are politically impossible. That channel is indispensable for de-escalation during a crisis, or for just starting the groundwork for a major agreement.
So given all this effort, what is the prize? What's the goal of this persistent, quiet negotiation, especially on the nuclear issue?
The desired outcome is still focused on preventing proliferation. They want a new, mutually acceptable agreement that places credible and verifiable limits on nuclear weapons development in the region. It's often an attempt to, reestablish some version of the JCPOA's constraints.
So focusing heavily on inspections and limiting the purity of enriched uranium.
That's the core of it.
And what's the incentive for Iran to agree to that? Because presumably they're giving up a major source of strategic leverage, the threat of a nuclear breakout.
That is where economic reality dictates policy. The source material highlights a very clear incentive structure. This nuclear limit would be offered in exchange for the comprehensive lifting of sanctions.
So lifting restrictions on oil sales, access to global banking.
Access to the SWIFT mechanism, re-entry into major global financial markets, all of it.
So it's a pragmatic trade. You swap military risk for desperately needed economic prosperity. It acknowledges that for the Iranian regime, long-term economic stability might ultimately be more vital than short-term military leverage.
That's it, exactly. The promise of reintegrating Iran's vast energy resources into the global market, attracting foreign investment for its aging infrastructure, and ending the financial isolation that has plagued its economy for decades. That's a powerful draw. This diplomatic path, while difficult, given the deep historical mistrust and the hardline elements on all sides, is overwhelmingly preferred by global powers.
Here's the alternative.
Because the alternative, global economic collapse or a regional nuclear war, is simply unacceptable. And it means the communication channels provided by these vital mediators must remain open at all costs.
It's a high-stakes, perpetual tightrope walk. But it proves that global forces, both positive and negative, are constantly working on this conflict because the stakes are just too high for anyone to look away.
So let's synthesize the journey we've taken through these crucial sources. We started with the assumption that this regional tension was, geographically distant and irrelevant to the average listener. Our deep dive has concluded the opposite. The global consequences are profound and immediate.
We look at the three core themes that really connect this regional tension to your daily life.
First, we defined the complexity of the global alliances. We showed that the deep military and economic ties between Iran, Russia, and China, and the U.S. commitment to Israel, they guarantee that any regional conflict becomes a global crisis. It increases the potential for miscalculation between the world's largest powers.
Second, we traced the terrifying path of the economic shockwave. We demonstrated how the geographical vulnerability of the Strait of
Hormuz transforms regional tension into a global supply crisis, leading directly to energy price spikes and the threat of stagflation in your local economy.
And third,
we analyzed the existential risk of proliferation. We explained how a single successful nuclear program in Iran would inevitably trigger a domino effect, pushing regional rivals like Saudi Arabia and Turkey to pursue their own weapons, and dramatically increasing the global risk of nuclear war or accident.
You now have the critical vocabulary and concepts to understand and discuss this complex story with real depth. Alliance entrapment, the Strait of Hormuz choke point, the failure of the JCPOA, the role of the IAEA, and the necessity of shuttle diplomacy. The sources gave us an incredibly concise look at how intensely connected our world really is.
A military move by one nation triggers an arms race in 3 others. A single narrow strait determines the price of goods shipped halfway across the world. The stability of the 21st century really rests on this intricate, volatile balance.
And as we close out this deep dive, we want to leave you, the learner, with a final provocative thought. It's built directly on the material we've just processed, and it's a fundamental question about how stability is truly achieved in this dangerously interconnected world.
The source material lays out that these powerful military alliances are designed to deter war, but they also guarantee that if a war does break out, it becomes global. It pulls in the superpowers. Conversely, the non-aligned mediators like Qatar and Oman provide these crucial non-military lifelines to prevent a total collapse. So, given that trade-off, does the stability of the next century rely more on powerful military alliances that scare rivals into submission? Or does it rely more on building and empowering alternative economic and diplomatic lifelines that can bypass that major power rivalry entirely?
The answer to that question will continue to define the policies of every major government in the world. Thank you for diving deep with us today.